them, like what do we need to do to define these and make them scientifically valid? And so for these experts, they suddenly saw this population as an opportunity to play out those debates with pretty devastating consequences. Yeah.
One quick question, and then a longer one. Have you been asked to testify before the TRC?
I have not been asked, no.
Not. And what do you think accounts for the fact that this, these studies have not come to light before now, given that similar such studies have been extensively written about in the U.S. and we were talking before about U.S. studies in Guatemala and so on. Is there something about the Canadian context that makes it difficult to uncover?
Yeah, well, I've asked myself that. Why did I discover this? Part of it is, prior to very recently, food history was not considered a serious form of historical inquiry. So, it took a more recent generation of scholars to actually go into the archives and look at those records. But another answer to that is that these scientists just thought this was normal. And so it wasn't something that they looked back upon and thought that was unusual. And part of that was because, as has since become clear with stories that have been published after this, more experiments were being conducted, informally even. There was an experiment that was uncovered by a CBC journalist who went into the archives at two of the schools in Kenora, in which experimental drugs for treating ear infections were tested on children, just by a nurse, just to see, what will we do? And some of the students, whether or not it's from the experiment, it's difficult to tell from the records, but went deaf. The treatments, because they didn't have the proper materials, they used enema, apparatus for pulling earwax out of the children's ears, leading to ruptured eardrums. Very problematic things, and this is just one. In addition to this, that we have only discovered because we started looking. We're going to discover more. I have no doubt more nutrition experiments and more, one of the things that in talking to survivors since this research came out is they all have story. Number one, they've been saying that we were being subject to experiments for decades. In communities across the country, people have known. This is not new to the communities. And they've been saying they've been subject to experiments, and individuals have told me about different things that, as a historian, have put on my radar. If they say, was this an experiment? And in my mind, I'm thinking, yes, it was. And in fact, one survivor emailed me with descriptions of unusual scars she had. And, I'm like, I'm not qualified to do this, to find this out, but you should contact this person. And in the end, she did discover that she was part of a tuberculosis vaccine experiment in the 1950s. So, this is just a small part of the story. And I'm glad that it's getting on. Hopefully, the government actually takes its apology seriously and starts to not only release the documents, but one thing about the TRC is it doesn't actually have the resources to go through these millions of documents and, tell all the different stories that they're going to be finding. And so, not only does the mandate need to be extended, but the number of researchers who need to go through those documents need to be expanded as well. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to the 50 years of residential schooling prior to these experiments, in terms of, if the residential schools are a sort of civilizing project, and you're talking, I love this image of the sort of helping the transition from a traditional diet to a modern diet. I mean, how does, one thing that I would expect in the 1890s and the 19 teens or so is that people, the children, girls perhaps, were being taught how to cook properly, maybe, I don't know. But, I mean, how are these schools chronically underfeeding children all the way back to the beginning?
Oh, definitely.
And so how does that fit into the civilizing project? What is the sort of historical context of the choice to underfeed children?
Well, it speaks to the civilizing project as being fundamentally contradictory. All of, residential schools, the Indian Act, this is all, whatever the supposed justifications were, when you actually look at it in practice, it's a mess, a jumble of different ad hoc approaches. And the thing about the schools is that the supposedly civilizing mission was the children were being so underfed that mortality rates from tuberculosis, which, mortality from tuberculosis, the effects of malnutrition are direct. And mortality rates at some of these schools were extraordinarily high. 20, 30, 40, 50% of pupils at residential schools looked at in the 1910s and 20s would die, either while at school or within a few years of being discharged. So those are just mind-bogglingly horrific statistics to think about, to think of, what was being done, and malnutrition played a key role.
You almost wonder if there's sort of a sense of, if the student is hardy enough, they're going to make it, and then they become sort of a proper Canadian citizen.
I don't know, it's, one of the things looking at these experiments, and one of the things talking to survivors and hearing their stories is, what was done in these schools is it's hard to get into the minds of both the administrators and the government and from the churches. Yeah, it's. I don't think you can look at it as being an ideologically consistent enterprise. It was. Many of the stories regarding food are about punishments. Food was used as an instrument of punishment and control, and there's no other explanation for some of the things I've been told than just sadism.
It's like trying to train out.
It was, well, one of the, it's hard to, it's, looking at residential schools, and one of the things that I've learned is the fact that children did survive and got out of these schools and were able to build lives in the aftermath of them is a testament to, their strength, because what was happening was, unimaginable conditions, and this went on for generations. Yeah.